For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. I'm meeting with political analyst Aubrey Machiki, who's discussing Marikana and Mangaung. Aubrey, do you believe the recent tragedy at Marikana is a turning point in the battle for the presidency of the ANC?
Well, to be honest, I keep on changing my mind. At the time of writing the column, my view was that because it occurred just over 3 months before the Mangaung conference in December, it would not be a decisive factor in determining the outcome of the leadership battle in Mangaung. And therefore my view at the time of writing the column was that if Jacob Zuma is undermined in any way in Mangaung and therefore loses the leadership battle, it will be for reasons other than the tragedy in Marikana, or for reasons including the tragedy in Marikana. And therefore it was my view at the time that Marikana on its own is not going to determine the outcome of the leadership battle. But I'm beginning to wonder whether I'm correct, because in order to answer that question definitively, you need to know whether Marikana is going to end earlier rather than later. So if the conflict in Marikana spreads to the mining sector as a whole, first of all, or the conflict in Marikana itself continues for a few more weeks, there is the possibility that people might succeed much better than they would have earlier in using it to undermine the president. Be that as it may, since we do not know whether it will spread to other sectors in the mining industry and whether the crisis in Marikana itself is going to deepen, I think the best we can say at the moment is that to the extent that it may become a factor, on its own, it is not going to be a deciding factor. But together with other things that may be happening in the ANC that will determine the balance of support, Marikana may be significant.
Former ANC Youth League leader Julius Malema has used the tragedy as a platform. Do you believe he will benefit from these unfortunate events?
Well, there too, we need to look at what is likely to happen over the next few weeks. I think at the moment, what Julius Malema is doing, not only in using Marikana, but also in using it to attack the president, he is giving ANC members a choice between two things. Firstly, the idea of re-electing the president in Mangaung on the one hand, and secondly, the idea of reinstating him as a member of the ANC and president of the Youth League. Now, it's quite possible that even those who have developed an antipathy towards the president might look at the two choices and come to the conclusion that if the alternative to a second term for the president is the reinstatement of Julius Malema, they might want to take their chances with giving the president a second term. But at the same time, even if he succeeds using Marikana and other factors to undermine the president, there is no guarantee that the victors in Mangaung will keep their end of the bargain and reinstate him as a member of the ANC, in which case all this work actually may be the work of a useful idiot to the opponents and enemies of the president. But I think what we need to concern ourselves with at the moment is that he seems to be broadening his campaign beyond Marikana. He seems to have decided that he's going to mobilize support in the mining industry as a whole, but also is going to mobilize outside the mining industry. If you look at the contact he has made, or the contact that has been made with him by some soldiers, disgruntled soldiers. Now, of course, that raises all sorts of questions about what that kind of support might mean. But what Malema must be careful of is not to mobilize support outside the ANC, do so successfully, and be very popular outside the ANC, only to find that inside the ANC, he does not enjoy sufficient support, because the situation can develop where he has much more support outside the ANC than inside the ANC. And if he doesn't have sufficient outside the ANC, all the work he's doing outside the ANC will come to naught. But as a country, the question we must ask ourselves is whether outside the ANC, is the damage he is likely to cause limited to the ANC, or does it extend to the country, particularly the economy? So for me, there are many ways of looking at the involvement of Julius Malema in all of this, because there is a possibility that to the extent that damage might be caused, it might be caused not only to the ruling party, but also to the economy and the country as a whole. Because bear in mind, you and I, looking at what is happening, have a sense of perspective and context. For an investor sitting in Paris, London, or New York, the threat might not be limited to the mining industry, but might extend to the economy as a whole. And therefore, what is happening in Marikana and the possibility that it is going to spread to other sectors in the mining industry has implications, not just for the mining industry, but for the economy as a whole. But if you look at the sociology of any strike, I have reason to be quite concerned about how Marikana might end. Because if you look at any strike, what tends to happen is that at the end of the first month of a strike, or come the first month end, pressures begin to build on individual strikers. If, as we're going to see in Marikana now, the strike goes beyond the second month end, those pressures become even more pressing on an individual striker, because he'll be getting phone calls as an individual from people asking for money, and so on. So as an individual, there's a possibility that a tension might develop between the immediate home and economic circumstances of a striker and his interests as a worker who is acting in unison with co-workers. Now, one scenario is one in which some miners in Marikana, feeling the economic pressure, decide they want to go back to work, and others try to stop them, in which case you cannot rule out the possibility of violence between the miners themselves. Now, the danger, of course, is that of more instability in the mining sector, but politically, the danger may be to those who have been trying to use Marikana to mobilize politically against the president, because they might end up with egg on their face and might not want to go back to those workers once those workers are divided and violence erupts amongst them. But there's another possibility too. People keep on thinking that mining companies, particularly longmen, can never accede to the demand of 12,500 rand. They can. And they can precisely because they want to end the strike. So what might happen is that they accede to the demand of 12,000 rand. But of course, what that gives them is the chance a month or two later to produce their balance sheet and show that the balance sheet is coming under pressure, and therefore the increase is not sustainable, and therefore argue that they have sufficient reason to retrench. So that's another direction Marikana might go.
You state in your column that the decision by the ANC to expel Malema has not translated into an effective containment strategy. Why do you say this, and how much of a role do you believe Julius Malema will play in the ANC's leadership battle?
Well, the ANC had a choice during the disciplinary hearing. The first choice was to use the disciplinary process to crush him. And this is what they decided to do. The second was to take his offer. He made an offer to the disciplinary committee to the effect that he would resign from all ANC positions and not avail himself for any leadership position in the ANC for a period of 5 years. Now, the question you must ask is whether by accepting the offer, that would not have constituted a more effective containment strategy than the decision to expel him, because he is now an outsider, and he's outside the ANC's disciplinary framework and cannot be contained. But at the same time, the failure to contain him effectively may in the end end up being a disadvantage to Malema, in this sense, that there is always the possibility that the course he has chosen will lead to his political destruction, in which case the choice the ANC has and other opponents of Julius Malema have is that of sitting back and doing nothing and allow him to continue on this path, a path that might end in his political self-destruction. Now, of course, there are those who are beginning to say there is a third choice, to arrest him, based on the allegations of corruption and fraud. That can go in one of two ways. It might actually resuscitate him. It might cast him in the role of a victim, particularly the victim of a president of the ANC who is using state institutions to fight his enemies. Or, alternatively, what might happen is that if indeed he is arrested and the state has a credible case, that might work to his disadvantage. But what we must bear in mind, to build such a case takes a long time. If something has to be done effectively against him by his political enemies inside the ANC, it has to happen within the next 3 months. And it seems to me to arrest him would be a blunt weapon. And it seems to me that the ANC might just have to sit back, allow him to continue on this path and see where it takes him.
You also mentioned that opponents of the president should not forget that in Zuma they're dealing with a wily fox and astute politician who has an intelligence background. Why do you think this is relevant?
Well, as much as I say that, this is an ANC president who is a former head of intelligence and therefore who is the master of what I call the disguised club. You underestimate him at your own risk. But his supporters must not make the mistake that was made by the supporters of former President Thabo Mbeki. They must not make the mistake of thinking Jacob Zuma is invincible and therefore overestimate his capacity in this battle. Because in the end, the era of overestimating his capacity or of thinking that he is invincible might cost him the presidency of the ANC.
As you state in your column, the winners at Polokwane have now fractured into opposing groupings. Which part of this grouping is still firmly behind President Zuma? And do you think they are strong enough to prevail?
Well, if you look at what happened in Polokwane, remember that 40% of the delegates in Polokwane voted against President Jacob Zuma. And part of that 40% hived off to form the Congress of the People. And the question you must ask is, of those in the 40% who remained in the ANC, who are they going to support? President Jacob Zuma, or whoever is going to be his opponent in Mangaung? But also remember that the 60% that voted for President Jacob Zuma in Polokwane can be divided into two. Part of the 60% wanted President Jacob Zuma to be elected both as ANC president and head of state. But part of that 60% wanted President Jacob Zuma to be elected ANC president only to the extent that he was a weapon for the removal of former President Thabo Mbeki, but did not see in him a head of state. Now, if they did not believe he was head of state material in Polokwane, do they believe he is head of state material today? Probably not. But the balance of support has become quite tricky, because the question is which indicator will help us understand who is likely to win this battle. Is it to look at the balance of forces as it was in Polokwane and how it has become reconfigured over the past 5 years? Should we look at the provincial balance of forces? Should we look at the balance of forces within each province? Should we look at the balance of forces in a different way, in terms of how the battle is being fought, in terms of the intelligence battle, the propaganda battle, and so on? So it seems to me, for us to understand the balance of support and the possible outcome of Mangaung, we have to look at a range of variables. At the moment, it's very difficult to read what is likely to happen in Mangaung. But come October, as the provinces start indicating who they want as a candidate, it will become much clearer. But even there, even after the provinces have proclaimed who they want as a candidate, there's still a battle to be fought between them and Mangaung itself.
So as you say, it's only uncertainty that's certain at the moment.
That's true. For me, at the moment, the only thing we can be certain of is uncertainty. Because I am convinced, in my analysis, that the president has lost some ground. I don't believe the president, if he wins in Mangaung, is going to win by a margin of 60%. I believe he's going to win, if he does win, by a margin of less than 60%. But in a way, I do not think that the leadership battle matters as much as we believe. In the sense that the question we need to ask is, what are the strategic goals that the ANC should be focusing on? And when you look at that set of strategic goals, you then ask the question, what then will be the tasks of leadership after Mangaung? And thirdly, in what state is the ANC likely to be? And my answer to that is that Mangaung is not going to deliver a less unstable or a more stable ANC. And what that means to me is that the possibility, it does not matter who they elect, whether it is Jacob Zuma, whether it is Kgalema Motlanthe, whether it is Tokyo Sekgwale, Cyril Ramaphosa, or Donald Duck. The ANC after Mangaung will most probably be an unstable ANC, because whoever wins this battle, I think, is going to win by a very slim majority. And therefore there always exists the possibility that the winner might win an election but lose the ANC.
That was political analyst Aubrey Machiki discussing the tragedy at Marikana and how it affects Mangaung.